Good evening, and welcome to another broadcast of the Caregivers Circle, where caregivers connect and are empowered to care. I am your host and founder of the Caregivers Circle, Kelly Abernathy-Porch, and I am extremely delighted that you have joined us this evening. As our regular listeners know, we usually have a special guest with us discussing a specific topic catered to those of us who are caregivers. However, this evening I will be sharing with you on the topic of caregiving from a distance, as I am actually a caregiver who provides caregiving from a distance myself to both of my parents, who live in Cleveland, Ohio, while I live in New Jersey. So we're approximately about 500 miles away from one another. I also have a very unique perspective, not only as a caregiver, but also as a care recipient. For those of you who may not know a little bit of my story, but in late 2007, I was diagnosed with a severe case of chronic thrombocytopenia, which in short basically is very low platelets. And because of this, I was hospitalized numerous times. As a result, I had to have several infusions as well as chemotherapy treatments. And later on, I was diagnosed as having lupus. And so I know firsthand the feeling of being sick and not able to perform the tasks that I once was able to do with ease. Furthermore, I also experienced so many mixed emotions regarding not having my parents or my siblings and other close family members around to help me, as pretty much the only family that I have in New Jersey is my immediate family, my 2 children, and my husband. And so, when there's times when you're going through or you're dealing with health challenges, I think we all can attest how helpful and just reassuring and comforting it is to have family around you. And so there are many people who have had and that are actually going through the experience of being a caregiver and being a care recipient where they live apart, where they do not live close. According to the National Institute on the Aging, there are 7 million caregivers who live further than, but who live away from their loved ones, who provide care from a distance. And they define caregiving at a distance as if you are 60 miles or more away from the recipient who is in need of care. So in addition to that, you have adult children, who may not be caregivers right now, but they will find themselves in the position of having to care for their loved ones as their parents age. And this is the importance. Well, I really feel like this is just so important that we discuss this topic on this evening. And it's something I've been wanting to do for a while. And I really want to just start off by sharing with you that last week for me was an extremely challenging week. Probably am still trying to recover a little bit from it, and I think I'm a little bit tongue-tied. But for the past 2 weeks, my mother had been under the weather. Initially, we thought it was just a really bad cold, a flu, or something like that. But it progressed, and it resulted in her being hospitalized. And then a few days after she was released, I received a phone call from my brother. And he called to tell me that a childhood friend of ours who still lives across the street from my parents called him to say that an ambulance was at their house. So, of course, this was just extremely disturbing. And immediately my brother called me. He said he had tried to call them. He tried to call their home as well as their cell phones, but he did not get an answer. And, of course, my immediate emotions started to flare, and my heart sank, because the last time that we got a call like this, my dad had a stroke, and the very next day my mother had a cardiac episode. And so, we have a tendency of going back to the last experience that we had. But I pulled it together, and I began to pray, gathered my composure, and I said, you know what, let me just call the house myself. And thankfully, my father answered the phone, and he was able to tell me that my mom was experiencing a lot of pain, and she was just really not well. And as he wanted to know, because I immediately told him, asked him what was going on, because I knew EMS was there. So as he was trying to, ask me how I knew that the EMS was there, I can hear my mother's voice, which was reassuring, but she did not sound good at all. Now, my brother, he lives in Cleveland, but he's about 30 to 40 minutes away, and I live 7.5 hours, or you want to say 500 miles away, which makes these moments extremely difficult for me. As well as, I know a lot of family members are dealing with the same thing. They have loved ones who live at a distance, whether it's their parents or just someone else that they love who is in need of care. So that is why tonight our topic is caregiving from a distance. And like I said a little bit earlier, I have been wanting to discuss this topic for quite some time, and I actually was looking for a guest to share with us their experiences. However, after the last 2 weeks, I just knew, and I was really instructed from the Lord and pushed from him to share this with you on this evening. So I pray that you are blessed by it. I pray that you are encouraged. And furthermore, really, I just pray that you would just gain new insight on this topic, information that I believe will be of help to us all. So I wanted to share that. And so it's just funny, I think about things. I think about how life works, because I remember as a child, I watched my aunt, who, as I grew up in Cleveland, she lived in New York. And I watched how every year she would visit Cleveland. I would look forward to the summers where she would come with my cousins, and pretty much it would be just the summer and maybe a holiday. So it was pretty much like just twice a year that she would come to Cleveland. And again, I really look forward to those times. And as I grew older, I noticed that her visits increased. And I realized that it was as my grandparents got older, her visits increased, and it was because of that. I watched as when she visited them, the flurry of activity would increase in my grandparents' home as well, because when she would come, she would notice those things that needed to be done. Now, let me start off by saying this. I have, there's 3 sons, including my father, so there's 3 boys, adult men, who belong to my grandparents, who live locally, and then my aunt, who is the only girl, who lived out of state. And so while my uncles, they would take care of all of the everyday tasks that needed to be done. They would take my grandparents or my grandmother, to doctor's appointments as needed, running errands, cutting grass, those things. As they got older and they needed to see that they needed to step in, they would do those things. However, it was when my aunt came, and I think sometimes it's also that woman's touch and that woman's eye and intuition, she would look to see what major things needed to be done in the house, whether it was changing the carpet, changing drapes, painting the house, all these different things. She would manage those tasks. So every time she visited, there was a project that she would lead, and they would come in, her brothers, my uncles would come in, and then they would support her and get those things done. And so I watched her cook for them. I watched her clean for them. I watched her take care of her parents and go up and down the highway to do whatever it was that needed to be done. And even then, when we did not have the benefit of having the internet and all these different other devices, she would still get on the phone, find out medications that they were taking, do whatever research. And I must say, by trade, she is and was a registered nurse. But she did that part, and I watched her do that, not even knowing and realizing that one day that would be me. And for many of us, that is the story. So whether or not you're in the position of having to care for your parents right now or another loved one, more than likely, you will find yourself in that position And it's okay. It's all about, and I've said it many times before, is about the circle of life. These are the stages that we go through. And so when it comes to individuals that live out of state, I think that while I think being a caregiver, period, there are a number of challenges that we deal with. But when you are a caregiver that lives at a distance, those challenges can be even more difficult to deal with. And I took the time, I just want to kind of go over about, I think it's 4 or 5, I think 4 challenges that caregivers from a distance really have a time dealing with. And, of course, first and foremost, we know is the distance. So, while somebody might be an hour away, and then there's someone like me who is 7.5 to 8 hours away, depending upon how far, the greater challenge at times. And so we have to be able to overcome I don't even say overcome, but manage that challenge. And that's what I want us to look at. Even as we discuss the different challenges, I don't want us to so much focus on, we're going to erase that challenge. We're not going to erase that challenge. Most of us aren't. They are there. But it's about being able to manage the challenge, knowing that this is where we are right now and what can we do to have the desired outcome that we want while this is where we are. This is our story. This is where we are. So we talked about, we said distance and also time. And that's whether or not you are a caregiver from a distance or if you are local. Many people are holding down jobs. They're managing their own household, their own responsibilities. And I must say each one of those things are large things. So they are big things to work, to have a full-time job. Managing your own household, that's a full-time job. All of these things are waiting. And yet and still, we have the responsibility of caring for our loved ones. So where do we find the time? And we're going to go through all of that. We're going to look at all of that, but I just want to just kind of point out the challenges. The third one would be our finances. We're not always able to travel because of our finances. I would have loved to get on the road or to get on a plane and go see about my mom last week. And it was a point when she had to go back to the hospital that's exactly what I wanted to do. But I really had to stop and I had to pray and ask the Lord for guidance. And that's one of the things that we want to talk about talk about as well. So if our finances can be a challenge, and also our own health concerns. There may be people who are not like me who are dealing with their own health challenges, but it is just even your well-being in terms of your energy, in terms of the exertion that you are putting on your body. As we said earlier, managing your own household is a challenge, as well as, having to care for someone on top of all of that. So those are things that we definitely want to take a look at. So we said distance, time, and our finances. And then we talked about our own health concerns as well. So let's kind of take a look at what I would like to do. We talked about the challenges. And so let's kind of talk about what are some of the tasks that are needed or that our loved ones need assistance with that we could do from a distance. And one of the number one things that I have on my list is scheduling doctor's visits, as well as arranging for transportation. For me, what I do is, even the other day, my mom got out of the hospital, and, of course, they give her doctor's appointments that she has to go to. I have made a habit, especially after my dad had his stroke, and my mom was the main caretaker, but I needed to try to support them both, the best that I could. And so what I do is I take all of their appointments and I put it on their calendar. And if you heard my alarm go off a few minutes ago, that was the alarm on my phone, because what I will do is to make sure that they don't forget that they have an appointment. Truth be told, if I didn't put my own doctor's appointments on the calendar, I may probably forget as well. So that's one of the things. And the other piece on that is that if you put their doctor's appointments on your calendar, it will also be a trigger for you to follow up with them to see how the doctor appointment went. What did the doctor say? Did they prescribe maybe any new medications? Are they scheduling any additional diagnostic testing? Things like that. So I think that's a good way to even keep abreast of what is going on in their lives health-wise. And so, as we know with caregiving, the range is very broad. You can have someone who is able to go about their daily business, and they're not going to forget their doctor's appointments, and, they pretty much can manage and feel very independent. But at some point, you want to begin to just have information, even if they're fine. I don't think it hurts to ask them when they have a doctor's appointment. And even if you don't have to tell them that you're putting it on your calendar, but you still want to kind of track it so you can do just what we spoke of, is, doing a follow-up to see how things are going and how that appointment went. Also, if they have a doctor's appointment, if they're not able to drive themselves, and of course you are where you are at a distance, you may need to reach out to someone to help them get to that appointment. And for those of you maybe who don't have a support system who can provide transportation, I think mostly, almost, at least I know major cities, they have transportation that they can provide to people to see their doctor's appointments. You just have to, look at the resources that are available in your area. And you can do that at your local Department of Aging, which we'll talk about that in a little while. Also, you want to talk about scheduling doctor's appointments, but you also want to make sure that your name is on your parents' records as someone who is authorized to receive information. And especially now with all of the different HIPAA privacy laws, they are very, careful, and they do not readily give out information. There was a day and time where you could call a hospital and you can find out what's going on. But right now, it is not like that. Now, I know for me, and I've done it on so many different times, I think once, and this is to give you an example. One time my mother was in the emergency room, and they were there for hours. She was actually there with my father. It was my father who had already had 2 strokes, and he was there. And she called me, and she said, we've been waiting for over an hour, and nobody has come out. And we wanted to make sure that there was no bleed, that there was no other stroke. Now, my parents are there. My mom is already stressed because she's dealing with that. I got on the phone from New Jersey. I called the hospital, which I keep in my contacts, and I called that emergency room department, and I spoke with the nurse, and I explained the situation. And while she did not necessarily, because she didn't have to give me medical information because he had not been seen, she was able to say, okay, they're being called next. And sometimes you have to do that. You have to take that extra step. And the same thing goes with, so when you do, have to do things like that, you want to make sure that your name is on the record so they know that they can give information. And if you know that your parent is going to the hospital or has a regular doctor, you can even find out from them what has to happen, whether it's a form that they have to sign. Most of the time, it's just a matter of them giving your name and your number, because that will prove extremely helpful if you ever need to. So because my parents have done that in advance after, different situations we've encountered, this particular time, I did a lot of speaking with the doctors on this time, because my mom, normally she's up in her, she's on it. But because she was really, really not feeling well, she was not able to communicate as she normally would. 2, because my dad has had his stroke, he does very well, but he suffers from aphasia. And what happens is when he is under stress, then the aphasia it gets worse. It's harder for him to communicate when he is under stress. So that left me to deal with doctors and nurses and making sure that she got the care that she needed. And I hope you guys were able to listen to a couple of weeks ago. We had a registered nurse with us, Linda Kennard, who gave us excellent information about how to be an effective advocate for your loved one while they're in the hospital. There was so much good information that she provided, and it's extremely important because a lot of times, unfortunately, nurses and doctors, when they don't see family and no one else is involved in the patient's care, they tend to be a little bit more lax, and there's not as much care that is put into caring for your loved one. Now, I'm not going to say that happens all the time, but it does happen. And so you want to stay connected. You want that hospital, that doctor, wherever they're going, you want them to know that there is someone out there that cares, that there is someone that is involved in their care, even though they're out of state. And I will tell you this, and I meant to say this before, that when you call, the first thing I say is when I say I am the daughter, I give my name, and I say I live out of state. Most of the time, because when you tell them that you live out of state, they will make an extra effort to, one, get back to you as soon as possible, and also to put you in touch with the doctor. So it is extremely important that you do that. I think sometimes people think, oh, well, I live out of state. I can't get there, so there's nothing really I can do. But there really is. You really do have options, and there's things that you can do that can be just as effective as you being there. So don't give up on that as well. The other piece of task that I wanted to cover is medication management. It's number one. It's extremely important that you know the medication that your loved one is taking. The medication that they take can affect how they're living from day to day. It can affect their ability to eat. It can affect even their ability to walk, getting up out of bed. There are so many different side effects from medications, and it's very important that you know what they are. Also, let's say if your loved one was hospitalized or taken to the hospital, one of the very first things they always ask is, what medication are you taking? If your loved one is unable to communicate that, it makes it very difficult for the healthcare workers to help them, because you don't want them to give them something that will not mix with what they're being giving. Also, it could be something that they're experiencing that could be attributed to the medication that they're taking. So it's extremely important to know what medication is being taken, and also to help manage taking that medication. Again, I know you're maybe out of state or you're far away. What I do, especially in the beginning when my dad, after his stroke, he had a number of medications that he had to take. Now, and my mom was there, and she pretty much managed it, but what would happen if something happened with my mom? Because as many of you know, the very next day after his stroke, she was hospitalized. So I knew that there had to be a backup. I had to know what was being taken, and I needed to make sure that he was taking it at the time that he was supposed to. So after I learned about the medication, did my research, and also just to keep in mind, when you do your research on the medication, make sure you know why they're being prescribed the medication. If it is to treat high blood pressure, if it is to treat cholesterol, it's important that you know what the medication is being used for. Then what I do, I make wonderful use of my smartphone. And that's any phone. I don't think it has to be a smartphone for you to set an alarm on your phone. What I would do is I set my alarm for the time that I knew that my father had to take his medicine, and I would just give him a quick call. I didn't have to necessarily stay on the phone with him that long. Just, Dad, did you take your medicine? And he would say yes or no. Now, most of the time, if he said no, I would either wait with him on the phone until he took it, or I will call again in 5 minutes just to make sure that he took it. Now, yes, is it possible that they could tell you they took it and they didn't? It is, depending upon, where that person is and what's going on with them. But for the most part, this is an extremely helpful tool and a helpful thing to do, because for the most part, just like you want them to stay well or to get better, they want to get better as well. So we went through that. The next thing on my list, and I kind of mentioned it in passing, but is creating your own caregiving circle. Having support is so very important, especially when you don't live close. And what you want to do is you want to take, as you, recruit, I call it Caregiver Circle recruitment. What you want to do is maybe reach out to your extended family members, maybe their siblings or their nieces or nephews. They may have friends, your friends, neighbors, and even their church family. You want to know who they're close to. I'm sure there are people who may be that you know of that are trustworthy to recruit them to help you with your parents or your loved ones. As I said earlier, when we had the situation last week, our friend who we grew up with, he still lives there, he called Jason. Anytime there's activity that does not look right at all, he calls my brother and he lets him know if something is going on, and then we're able to act and to put into action to do things. In fact, I think the first 2 times when that happened, because my brother is about 30 to 40 minutes away, we have a cousin who's closer. So he called our cousin, and our cousin was able to get there first. And so those are the types of things that you want to do. I think having a good relationship with a neighbor is really important, because, you can see the regular activity of our neighbors. I know I'm constantly looking out for my next-door neighbor who lives next door. She recently lost her husband, and even before that, she was his caregiver. And I would just kind of look out and make sure she's there, and just to see if the activity looks normal. And that's what good neighbors do, so that if anything was off or was not right, then you can call, family members, or you can begin to take action. I have a very good friend who I grew up with. Even in this time, she called my mother to see how she was doing after she got home. Is there anything that she needs and she can do? So I know that I have people that if it's an emergency, there are my go-to people who are part of my caregiver circle who will go and check on my parents to make sure that they're okay. There are members from their church that they are close with, and there's one set that lives near the hospital where they normally go to, so they'll stop by the hospital. So it's like really seeing, when people ask you if there's anything I can do, let me know, you should let them know. Many times we sometimes think, oh, well, they're just saying it, or, oh, we don't want to be a bother. It is not a bother. We all are put here to help one another. And again, my go-to scripture about each joint supplies, we all have a part that we need to play. And even if it's the smallest, least little thing, it helps. For example, it's interesting with siblings. I know that for a lot of people sometimes, even those that live locally, being a caregiver can cause conflict among siblings. But it really should not, but it does. But I think to help to minimize that, communication is key. It is so very important that you communicate with your siblings. And you may even need to divvy up tasks, things that they do. Now, for example, my brother is there, but his strong point is not talking to doctors and nurses. So some people say, well, he could do that because he's there. But that's not his thing, and that's okay. And that's the thing we have to learn, that that's not okay, because sometimes he can talk to them, sure, but I'm just a little bit stronger in being able to ask certain questions or details. And I think that also comes from me being in a hospital so much. So I know a lot of things to ask or tests to suggest that they run. So that's my part. So for me, just to kind of give you an example, so I kind of liaise with doctors and nurses. I put their appointments on my calendar. I follow up to make sure that they take their medication. And my brother and my sister-in-law, what they do is my brother will go and cut grass. They both have arranged for snow removal for them, so they don't have to worry about the snow. My sister-in-law, she calls. She's gotten them help with, managing the home, the inside of the home, getting things done. So we each play our role, but we play the role that we're suited for. And I think that the source sometimes of conflict that comes from siblings as it relates to caregiving is that our expectations are not met and they're not realistic. We expect that if we have gone over and taken out the garbage or gone over and washed dishes for the last month, that then our siblings should go and do the same thing. But that person may not be suited for that. And we have a tendency of looking at someone else's lives and determining what it is they should be doing and not be doing. And when they don't do it, we have a problem, and that's not good. Because just like we each have families, we have jobs, we have other things that we are managing, we have to be able to do all of that. And so I think it's so important to sit down with your siblings or those that are going to be responsible for care and determine, okay, what can you do, in which way you can contribute. Because everybody can't contribute in the same way. You may have one sibling who can contribute financially, where another sibling is unable to contribute financially. However, they can contribute in another way that is needed. So it's so very important to communicate, build your circle based upon your strengths and your weaknesses of you as well as those that are in your caregiver circle. And one of the things that I wanted to say that I did not say when we were talking about the calendar, because, this is more so even a resource. The resources of using your phone or your calendar book, whatever you want to do, you can put that information in your phone to alert you for everything. So you can set reminders for some of these tasks that need to be done. So that's an important resource that I don't want us to downplay or to forget at all. Another task that can be helped out with is managing finances. Now, I think it's important that remain in the immediate family. However, there may be someone else who is trustworthy. And also the management of finances, the range is wide. It doesn't necessarily mean that person has to have access to their finances, but it could be just someone that sits with them and helps them write bills, or to say, okay, did you get this paid, so that your loved one is not sitting in the dark or doesn't have electricity or anything. So it's important to help them with their finances in the way in which they need. Some, yes, may need help in terms of balancing a checkbook, that require access to the funds, but there's so many other tasks that's not involved. So, and you want someone who is good with finances and is trustworthy. And that can be done from a distance. I know for myself at one point, can't remember, it might have been after the second stroke, I remember kind of like trying to get from my mother, okay, what bills do you guys have? Knowing even, okay, what is the local gas company called? What's the name of that? Okay, what's your phone provider? Even your cell phone provider as well as your landline, who is the provider for there. Some of these things are really important that you know, because if you're not able to communicate with them and you need to make sure that these services stay on, you'll need to be able to maybe pay bills for them. And not only the other piece to think about with that is not only about paying them, but seeing what services that they can take advantage of. Like I know here in New Jersey, for your water bill, if you have someone who is a senior citizen or if they're disabled, there's a discount that can be applied towards their water bill, just as there are programs for gas and electric bills for aging and those that may be disabled. And that goes on, even with making sure that they don't get cut off, because there are some people who rely on medical equipment that requires electricity. And so there's paperwork that has to be completed that their doctor can sign and put on their file so that they don't get disconnected. I know one of the things is that if you're dealing with a loved one maybe who is hospitalized for a long period of time, they might not get paid. They might not get paid because they're not available or home to even pay it. So these are things that you should be aware of, know how to handle it, or even just have a plan in place. For those of you whose parents and loved ones are doing just fine, you want to begin to think about these things and put some things in place so should the time arrive, you know what needs to be done. So I think this is really the purpose of this, especially for those, I think this goes for even people that live locally, but also especially for those that do live away. You want to also make sure that things are in order. So let's say when you're going for a visit, that time being that you don't have a lot of time. So when you go to your visit, you want to make sure you have targeted visits so that you can get some of these things done. As I said earlier, I watched my aunt come in, and there was always a flurry of activity because she was making sure that things got done. So whether it is, speaking to a doctor or obtaining the information in terms of the utilities or their bills or other things that need to be done, you want to make sure that you have a productive trip. Yes, of course, you want to spend time with them and, have fun, but you also want to make the most of it. And you want to make sure that you walk away having things set in place. Maybe there's a service that they need to enroll in, like a Meals on Wheels. You can do that then. And a lot of it will be even pre-planning. And, we said earlier, we talked about, some of the challenges, but we're going to talk about even possible solutions for those challenges. So right now, we're going through the tasks. We talked a little bit about home maintenance as being a task, and cutting of the grass or maintaining their yard, snow removal, doctor's visits. There are certain things that just are required for upkeep for their home. You might want to look into seeing if you can get someone to come in once a month. Yes, I know money, that can be a challenge, but we can look at other options because just like in your circle, there may be someone who could come in and help with, light housekeeping. There's so many different services that are available. It's just a matter of taking advantage of those services and seeking them out. And then also I wanted to add on here a task is social activities. You want your parents or your loved ones to still remain socially active. So whether that's somebody coming to visit them at home, them going to church, going to a senior center, or participating in an activity or hobby that they like, it's important that they still live. And so, I think sometimes we can get so caught up in our lives that we are just looking at the bare necessities, and we may not deem social activities as a bare necessity. But I want you to know that it is so important that they remain active, especially in our absence. Just as we find it difficult to be away from our parents as they're aging or they're sick, it's hard for them to be away from us as well. And so you want them to be fulfilled. You want them to have a life. And so there are so many things. They have so many different activities for seniors. And a lot of those senior citizen centers, they actually have transportation where they can pick them up and bring them back as well. Now, I went over, a list of those things. And earlier we talked about the challenges, and, we talked about distance as being the number one. And so I gave information in terms of how to deal with that challenge of distance by implementing some of the things we discussed. One of the things that I forgot, I talked a little bit about smartphones, but now on a lot of these smartphones we have there's Skype and there's also FaceTime, where you can be face-to-face and you can see your parent. Or when the doctor comes into the hospital room, you can talk to the doctor. And that's being done a lot. I've done that so many times. Even when I'm in the hospital, I will FaceTime them. So they can see me and I can see them, or we can communicate with the doctor. Also, one of the things we talked about, the challenge of finances, not being able to always afford travel. And so, again, that's why when you are able to travel, you want to make the most of these visits so that they are productive. But you also, again, that is reaching out to your circle, creating your circle, reaching out to them. The same thing when, you're going through your own health challenges. Those are the things that you want to implement in order to deal with that. And then also the time. That's the one thing I wanted to go back to, because some might say, well, those are great things, but there's also time involved in those. But it really is about looking at our schedule and seeing those areas that we can tweak. When it comes to our loved ones and our parents, especially our parents, you only get one. You only get one mother. You only get one father. And if you've been so blessed to have that special aunt or uncle or a step-parent, that's a blessing. Life itself is a blessing, and it's important. And God put us here. He has given us a responsibility to care for those who are in need. And it says, that we have to sometimes bear the infirmities of the weak. And so it's not that, I hope I didn't say sometimes. We have all the time. Let me just correct myself on that. And so it's important that we look at this as a priority and trust God. We should be submitting all of our cares, all of our concerns to Him, for He loves us. And He knows exactly what we stand in need of. His word says that He would never leave or forsake us, and He won't. And He knew before we were even born that we would be given the task of being caregivers. And so because He did, that means He has already equipped us for the journey. And so I pray that you would take heed to some of these suggestions. On our website, there is a list of resources that are there, like regarding the Department of Aging. Also, what I did want to share is that there is an awesome booklet that's produced by the National Institute on Aging. You can view it online or you can order it, and it's called Caregiving from a Distance. And that can be found at NIA.nih.gov. You can go there and you can order that booklet, and it has so much information. So I thank you so much for tuning in. I really pray that you have been encouraged, that your spirits have been uplifted, and that you will look at your situation with knowing that you can do it, that it's not as hard as you might have initially thought. And I pray that even as you interact with other people, you may run into people that are going through that right now, who are having to be a caregiver and provide care from a distance. I ask that you would share this information with them. I also pray that you would even just remember to lift them up. I think that's one of the things that we forget to do, is to really understand the importance and the power of prayer. The Lord wants us to be encouraged. And so He has given us His word. He has given us also each other. And so I thank you so much for taking this time out to be with us. For more information on the Caregiver Circle, please visit us at www.thecaregivercircle.org, where you can connect with other caregivers on our blog, You can also submit prayer requests 24 hours a day. And again, like I said, there's a resource page that will give you lots of information, or at least put you in touch with information. And you can also connect with us on our Facebook page, which is the Caregiver Circle, and you can follow me on Twitter at Kelly Caregiver. So before we go, I just want to end in a word of prayer. Father God, I just thank you so much for this time. I thank you for every caregiver that is out there, and especially those, Lord, that are providing care from a distance. I pray that you would continue to encourage us, Lord, and empower us to do what you have called us to do in this season of our lives. I pray that you just show them, Lord, how faithful you are, that you are a healer and a God that delivers and sets free. So we just give you all praise, glory, and honor in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. Once again, I pray this time has ministered to you all and left you feeling a bit more empowered and encouraged. And remember, you can do all things, including caregiving, through Christ who gives you strength. Thank you and good night.